a grieving man who hasn't spoken to another soul in months, a dog who senses more than she shows, a dying bear that shows up at their door in the middle of a snowstorm. The setup sounds impossible until it becomes undeniable, because when the bear limps away and returns not alone, but with cubs clinging to life, Lucas faces the first choice he's cared about in years, and that choice leads to something neither man nor beast saw coming. A second chance. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The storm had rolled in earlier than forecasted. From his wooden cabin, perched halfway up Bald Eagle Ridge, overlooking a frozen stretch of forested North Carolina wilderness, Lucas Grant watched the sky churn from gray to steel to a heavy, suffocating black. The snow had begun falling in sweeping gusts by late afternoon and by nightfall. The world outside was a roaring, white abyss. There were no sounds of birds, no rustle of deer through brush, only wind howling like a wounded creature. Lucas, a tall, rugged man in his early 40s, stood near the wood-burning stove, feeding it another log. His dark brown beard had grown wild since autumn, flecked with streaks of gray like ash and firewood. He moved with the quiet strength of someone who used to command chaos. His past life as a mountain rescue specialist had once been filled with urgent helicopter lifts, avalanche beacons, and lost hikers. But all that ended 2 winters ago when his wife, Erin, and their daughter, Lily, died in a car accident caused by black ice on a mountain road. Since then, Lucas had vanished into solitude, his grief buried under layers of snow and silence. Now, his only companion was Maggie. Maggie was a 5-year-old German shepherd, rescued from a local shelter the same year Lucas withdrew into the mountains. Her coat was a classic saddle black and tan, thick and lush, built for cold weather. She was lean, intelligent, and loyal to the bone. Most dogs barked at strangers or wildlife. Maggie observed first, calculated, then decided. She had grown up in silence, mirroring Lucas's moods like a shadow with a heartbeat, as the storm raged. Maggie lay beside the cabin door, ears twitching at every shift of the wind. Lucas stirred his pot of venison stew, its aroma thick and hearty in the air. The storm wasn't dangerous. He had enough firewood, food, and power from a backup generator. Then Maggie stood up, slowly, body tense. She didn't growl, her ears lifted fully, eyes fixed on the door. Lucas turned. "What is it?" "Girl." A thump came, soft, then again, heavier. Lucas froze. It wasn't the wind. He moved to the door and placed his hand on the handle, pausing to grab his flashlight from the hook. The knocking came again, more like a weight falling gently against the frame. Maggie hadn't moved a muscle, but her eyes were wide, and her stance stiff, alert, not aggressive. Lucas opened the door just a crack, wind immediately biting at his face. A dark shape collapsed onto the porch. He opened the door wider, sweeping the light over the figure. What he saw made his breath catch. It was a bear, not a full-grown grizzly, but a large American black bear, though black was a misnomer. Its fur was a muddy brown, thick in some places, clumped with frost in others. The bear was gaunt, emaciated. Its ribs showed clearly through the fur. Its left front paw was held off the ground at an unnatural angle, crusted with blood and ice. It was breathing heavily, steam pouring from its nostrils like smoke. Lucas instinctively stepped back, but Maggie moved forward. She walked to the edge of the doorframe and sat, watching. No growl, no bark, just quiet awareness. Lucas was stunned. He stepped outside, boots crunching over snow. He approached the bear slowly, flashlight lowered. The bear lifted its head weakly and made a sound, low, guttural, somewhere between a whimper and a moan. He couldn't believe it. This animal had climbed all the way up the ridge, during a snowstorm, in its condition, to reach a human's shelter. It wasn't aggressive, it was desperate. Lucas knelt slowly. "Hey," he said softly, "what the hell are you doing out here?" The bear shifted. It didn't move to flee, didn't show teeth, only lifted the injured paw a few inches before letting it fall back into the snow. Lucas saw the wound clearly now. A jagged tear ran from the upper pad through the ankle, blackened at the edges. Infection. Frostbite. The bear wasn't just cold, it was dying. He hesitated, then he looked at Maggie. She met his gaze, gave a small nod just once, and kept her eyes on the bear. Lucas stood, opened the door wide. "All right," he muttered. "Just for tonight." He grabbed an old tarp and laid it just inside the cabin. "Come on," he said, voice steady. It took time, painfully slow movement, but the bear, with agonizing effort, dragged itself over the threshold and collapsed onto the tarp. Maggie stepped aside, making way, and returned to her spot near the door. Inside, Lucas stoked the fire until it roared. He retrieved a first aid kit from the storage cabinet, the one he hadn't touched in over a year. The contents were basic, meant for people, not bears, but he made do. He washed the wound, applied ointment, and wrapped it in gauze and cloth. The bear flinched, let out a low moan, but didn't swipe or snap. Lucas worked silently, hands steady, mind spinning. Once the wound was wrapped, he stepped back, letting the bear rest. It hadn't moved much, but it was breathing easier, belly rising and falling like slow tides. He turned to Maggie. She had lain down again, now facing the bear directly, her expression unreadable. "You knew," he said, almost laughing. "You damn well knew it wasn't dangerous." She wagged her tail once. The wind screamed outside, but inside the cabin. Warmth settled in pockets across the room. Firelight danced on the wooden walls, flickering over photos of a past life. His wife's smile, his daughter's freckles, his old rescue team. Lucas sat down across from the bear. Guess we're not so alone tonight. Morning came slowly on Bald Eagle Ridge. Snow had stopped falling sometime before dawn, but the landscape remained cloaked in thick silence. A layer of white shimmered across every branch and rooftop, and the sky was still a bruised, cold gray. Lucas Grant stood at the cabin window, watching his breath fog the glass. The bear, still unnamed, still mysterious, lay curled on the floor near the stove, wrapped in a torn wool blanket. Its labored breathing had steadied during the night, but its injured paw remained swollen under the bandage. Maggie lay beside it, vigilant but calm, her thick coat rising gently with each breath. Lucas turned back to the table where he stirred a mug of instant coffee. The night had left a weight on him, heavier than the snowfall. He had invited a wild creature into his sanctuary, and somehow it had felt right. It had felt needed. A low sound, almost a grunt, pulled his attention. The bear had lifted its head, nostrils flaring. It turned toward the door, and slowly, agonizingly, rose to its feet. Lucas moved quickly, hand ready to steady the animal, but the bear didn't need it. It limped forward, glancing at Maggie, then back at the door. Lucas frowned. "You want out?" The bear made another noise, deeper this time. Its gaze was intense, urgent. Maggie rose without hesitation and padded to the door. Lucas sighed, threw on his parka, and pulled his boots over thick wool socks. When he opened the door, wind whipped his face, and the bear stepped onto the porch with a low grunt of pain, but continued forward. Maggie went ahead. Ears perked. Lucas followed. They moved downhill into the woods, past thickets glazed with ice. The bear kept glancing back, ensuring they stayed close. Lucas realized this wasn't a random walk. It had a destination. Half a mile in. The terrain thickened. Trees crowded closer. Lucas recognized a narrowing of the path. A natural bottleneck where snow piled high and travel slowed. Maggie veered off slightly, sniffing furiously at a drift near a fallen pine. Suddenly, she barked once. Sharp. Alert. Lucas turned. Mags. She stood at the edge of the drift, tail straight, paw raised. Something was beneath the snow. Lucas rushed over and knelt. A dark shape was buried in the snowbank. He brushed away layers of powder to reveal russet fur, lean, sleek, trembling, a fox. Its side rose and fell rapidly. Eyes wide with fear and pain. One back leg was twisted unnaturally. Blood had stained the snow near its hip. Lucas hesitated. What the hell? The fox, a young male, no more than 2 years old, whimpered faintly. Maggie stood protectively beside it, eyes darting between Lucas and the animal. "You're serious," he muttered, pulling off a glove. The fox didn't fight as he examined the wound. The leg was broken, likely from a fall or fight. It wouldn't survive long in the cold. Maggie nudged it softly. As if urging Lucas to act, he took a breath, removed his scarf, and gently bundled the fox inside. "Okay, let's add to the rescue party." They continued. After another hour, the bear stopped at a large rock outcrop nestled beneath a line of ice-heavy firs. It grunted, then moved toward a narrow crevice nearly hidden behind a curtain of icicles. Lucas stepped closer and heard it, faint, high-pitched whimpering. He knelt, flashlight piercing the dim opening. 2 bear cubs. They were huddled together, trembling. No older than a few months. They were too small to be alone. Their eyes blinked slowly, half shut from exhaustion. Lucas felt his chest tighten. "Oh, God, you brought us to your kids." The mother bear nudged him aside and crawled halfway into the crevice, sniffing and grunting softly. The cubs responded with tiny cries, lifting their heads weakly. Lucas set down the fox gently, wrapped in the scarf, near a dry patch of snow. He turned to Maggie. "Watch them." She sat, erect and alert. He dashed back along the trail and returned 20 minutes later, pulling behind him a sled, an old wooden frame he had repurposed from a broken deer carrier, lined with canvas and wool blankets. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. With great care. Lucas wrapped each cub in extra layers from his pack. The mother bear watched, her expression unreadable but trusting. He laid both cubs onto the sled, then lifted the injured fox into a separate corner wrapped in his scarf. The sled creaked as he secured ropes across the top. Lucas met the bear's gaze. Ready. The return trip was slower. The sled dragged heavy through deep drifts, and Lucas's legs burned with the effort. Maggie led the way, turning often to check on him. The mother bear limped steadily behind them, favoring her injured leg, never once falling far behind. Snow began again near dusk, thin, soft flakes this time. Lucas looked up through tree limbs, catching a glimpse of fading blue sky. They reached the cabin as light bled out of the sky. Inside, warmth bloomed like a promise. Lucas knelt beside the stove and set the fox down on a towel-lined crate. He'd clean its wound properly later. He unwrapped the cubs and placed them on a thick quilt near the fire. They whimpered briefly, then settled into the heat. The mother bear crawled next to them, curling around their bodies like a living blanket. Maggie lay beside them, not touching, but close, watching them all. Lucas stood in the middle of the cabin and looked at the surreal scene, an injured fox asleep in one corner, a bear and her cubs resting by the fire, and Maggie on silent guard. He let out a long breath. "You're all insane," he said to no one in particular, but his voice had no anger in it, only awe. Snow continued to fall for days. Outside, the world lay frozen, wrapped in thick silence, while inside the cabin, life began to settle into a strange but steady rhythm. Lucas Grant rose early, as he always did, but now his morning started with more than coffee and quiet. He tended to the fox first, now housed in a shallow wooden crate lined with blankets and old towels. The fox, whom he had taken to calling Rusty, was healing slowly. His eyes no longer held that dazed, panicked glaze. He watched Lucas now, even allowed him to change the splint on his leg without growling. Across the room, near the wood stove, the bear cubs rolled in sluggish play beneath the heavy quilt. Their fur was still thin and patchy in spots, but they had grown stronger each day. The mother bear. Lucas had started calling her June. After the month his daughter Lily was born, rested beside them. She rarely moved far, except to drink water or sniff at the windows when the wind changed. Her paw remained bandaged, but the infection had slowed, and her eyes no longer appeared dull with pain. They followed Lucas around the room now, studying him with quiet alertness. Maggie, as always, stayed close to Lucas but had claimed a soft rug near the cubs as her preferred post. She watched them like a sentry, never barking or chasing, always observing. If one of the cubs squealed too loudly or wandered near the fire, she would gently nudge it back. Lucas often looked at her with something close to disbelief. She wasn't just tolerating their presence. She had accepted them as part of her charge one evening. As the fire cracked and Lucas flipped through an old book on wildlife medicine, he began to speak, low, uncertain at first. "You know. Mags," he said without looking up. It would have been Lily's 9th birthday last week. Maggie's ears twitched. Lucas set the book down, eyes distant. She used to name every animal we saw on our hikes. One time, she found a caterpillar and called it Professor Fuzzybottom. A short laugh escaped him, but it faded quickly. Aaron hated the cold, but Lily loved the snow, said it made the world quiet enough to hear magic. The room held the silence gently. She died before I could say goodbye. He continued, both of them did. He swallowed hard. I wasn't there, I was on a mountain, pulling a kid out of an avalanche zone. Maggie rose and rested her head against his knee. Lucas reached down and placed a hand on her neck. Guess I've been running from everything since. Until now. It was the first time he had spoken their names out loud in months. The following morning, Lucas stepped outside to collect firewood when he spotted movement down near the tree line, faint but unmistakable. A figure in bright red and green winter gear emerged from the snow-covered pines, waving an arm. Lucas narrowed his eyes. What the hell? He walked halfway down the slope, Maggie bounding ahead. The figure turned out to be a young woman in her early 20s, face flushed from cold, cheeks scattered with freckles. She wore thick black-rimmed glasses that had fogged slightly and carried a pack almost as large as she was. "Hi," she called out, breathlessly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." Lucas slowed as he approached, cautious. "Are you lost?" "No," she said with a nervous laugh, brushing snow from her jacket. "I'm Emma Hartley. I'm a grad student in wildlife biology at Duke. I was tracking a tagged female black bear last week. Then the storm hit, and my GPS dropped. My tent didn't hold up so well. I've been camping under a tarp for 2 nights. Lucas blinked. You camped through this storm. Don't recommend it, she said, teeth chattering now. I was heading back to the ranger station, but I saw the smoke from your chimney. Lucas studied her. She was petite, barely 5'3", with a round, expressive face and wide green eyes. There was a fierce intelligence in her voice, curious, fast-thinking, but not reckless. Still, she looked exhausted, her lips pale and fingers stiff from cold. You should come inside, he said. She followed him to the cabin, eyes widening as she entered, and froze mid-step. Is that a bear? Lucas gave a half-smile. 3, technically. Emma dropped her pack and knelt beside the cubs, whispering. Oh my God, she looked up at him. Amazed, you're sheltering a whole family. He nodded, and a fox. Emma sat cross-legged, rubbing her hands together for warmth. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the craziest. Lucas shrugged, bit of both. They gave her tea and food, and she quickly regained her strength, within hours. Emma had offered to stay a few days, to help, to observe, to document. This kind of proximity to a healing, wild family. It's unheard of, she said excitedly. No one's ever documented black bear maternal recovery behavior like this in a controlled environment. Lucas hesitated at first, but something about her energy, gentle but inquisitive, made him agree over the next few days. Emma proved invaluable. She gently cleaned June's wound while murmuring softly. She sketched the cub's size and behavior in her field journal. She even wrapped a proper cast for Rusty's leg, using supplies from her pack. She and Maggie bonded quickly. Emma gave her belly rubs and called her the wisest girl in the house. Lucas watched all this with quiet awe. He had built this life out of solitude, yet somehow it had filled itself with fur, breath, firelight, and now voices, and in the evenings, when the snow whispered outside, and fire danced shadows across the walls. The cabin no longer felt like a retreat from the world. It felt like part of it again. The thaw came quietly. It wasn't dramatic, a shift barely noticeable at first. The icicles hanging from the eaves of the cabin began to drip in slow rhythm. The packed snow softened, turning from powder to slush. Outside, birds returned to the woods, their calls light and cautious, as if unsure if winter had truly loosened its grip. Inside the cabin, the change was felt even more keenly. June, the mother bear, stirred more often. Her paw had healed enough that she no longer limped severely, and her strength returned in small surges, nudging a cub more firmly, sitting up longer, walking slowly from one corner of the room to another. The cubs had grown noticeably. Their movements were now full of playful energy, small growls and squeals echoing through the cabin as they wrestled in the quilts. Maggie watched it all in quiet acceptance, her posture calm, though Lucas noted her tail no longer wagged as freely. Emma Hartley remained. Now, part of the cabin's daily pulse, she spent most mornings recording behavioral notes, sketching in her weather-worn journal, and emailing reports when the satellite signal cooperated. Her presence had become natural. The small bunk she claimed in the loft was strewn with books, snow gear, and a thermos she refilled religiously with black coffee. One evening, Lucas stood by the fire, staring into the flickering orange. "They can't stay," he said softly. Emma crouched nearby, feeding Rusty a mixture of meat and broth, glanced up. "I know." Lucas nodded, eyes still fixed on the flames. "They need more than this cabin, space, freedom. Emma moved beside him. There's a sanctuary north of Asheville. I contacted a colleague there, Dr. Yvonne Bristol. She runs a transition program for injured wildlife. Minimal human contact, plenty of forest, it's fenced. But vast. Lucas turned to her. You think they'd take June and the cubs? Emma smiled faintly. I told her their story. She said she'd make room. Lucas said nothing for a long time. The next morning, the decision took root. He began packing supplies, blankets, water containers, crates. Emma coordinated with the sanctuary via radio and limited internet. Finalizing transport plans, the process would take a day. By evening, all was ready. Maggie sat near the door, head resting on her paws. She watched Lucas with a kind of sorrowful knowing. He knelt beside her. I know, girl, I don't like it either. She licked his hand, slow and steady. June was less certain about the preparations. She paced more than usual when Lucas brought the transport crate near. She gave a low, uncertain growl. The cubs huddled closer to her. Emma approached gently, voice calm. It's okay, Mama, just a ride, you'll be safe. Lucas squatted nearby, speaking softly too. You trusted me once. Trust me again. June didn't resist when he laid a blanket inside the crate, with soft coaxing and Maggie nearby, quiet and firm. June entered the crate, the cubs following close. The morning of departure was gray but mild. Lucas and Emma loaded the crates onto a borrowed sled designed for rough terrain. The fox, Rusty, now healed enough to hobble gently, would remain. He had taken to curling near the fire alone, disappearing into the forest for short periods and returning instinctively. As Lucas latched the final crate, he felt Maggie lean against his leg. She gave a soft huff, neither excitement nor warning. Just farewell. The journey to the sanctuary took most of the day, moving slowly across muddy trails and half-melted snow paths. When they arrived, the staff greeted them with quiet awe and professionalism. Dr. Yvonne Bristol, in her late 50s with silver-streaked braids and skin lined from sun and wind, greeted Lucas and Emma with a warm but focused expression. She had a gentle manner, but her eyes held no nonsense resolve. You did good work, she said simply, placing a hand on June's crate. Emma and Lucas watched as June and the cubs were released into a large enclosure filled with trees, small caves, and shaded cover. June stepped out slowly, scanning the new world, then turned. She looked at Lucas directly. Lucas froze. June held his gaze. Then she looked back at the cubs, nudged them forward, and walked into the woods. Lucas swallowed hard. Later, as the truck rumbled away from the sanctuary, Emma turned toward him. So, she said, cautious. I got an offer, a project in Alaska, wildlife rehabilitation and research outside Kenai, 4 months, small team, full winter immersion. Lucas raised an eyebrow. They need someone experienced with rescue, someone with instincts. Lucas looked out at the road, lined with bare trees and patches of lingering snow. That sounds like you. Emma tilted her head. I said I'd go if you and Maggie came too. He laughed, but it caught in his throat. I haven't left this mountain in years. Emma didn't push, just think about it. They reached the cabin before dusk. Maggie ran ahead, tail high, as if she sensed the silence that had fallen inside. She sniffed every corner, then lay near the fireplace, eyes open and still. Lucas stood in the center of the cabin. Without June and the cubs, it felt emptier, the air somehow wider, but it didn't feel like loss. He walked to the window and stared into the fading light. Emma stepped beside him. "Think they'll be okay?" she asked. Lucas nodded. They will. And, for the first time, he believed it. The first green pierced the snow like hope breaking ground. Shoots of wild grass pushed up through patches of melting white, and the air had shed its harshness, replaced by the earthy scent of thawing soil. Birds returned in flocks, their songs weaving through the tall pines. The river, once frozen solid, now gurgled softly in the valley below. Lucas Grant stood on the porch of his cabin, boots planted firmly in the softening earth. The morning sun cast golden light through the bare branches, catching the tiny glint of dew on bark and twig. He sipped from his tin mug black coffee, as always, and stared into the woods where so much had changed. It felt like lifetimes ago when he'd opened his door to a wounded bear. Since then, he had nursed wild things, made peace with ghosts, and said goodbye to creatures who'd taught him more than silence ever could. He turned to glance inside the cabin. Maggie was lying near the hearth, her fur catching the glow of early light. She was older now, her muzzle flecked with gray, but she remained as watchful and steady as ever. The crate that once held Rusty was empty. He had returned to the wild 2 weeks ago. Lucas had watched him disappear into the trees with a quiet pride. He had done what needed doing. Emma stood at the kitchen counter, packing the last of their gear. She moved with her usual mix of purpose and grace, pulling zippers, tying bundles, checking lists. Her brown hair, once always braided tightly, now hung loose around her shoulders. There was a new ease in her movements, a softened edge to her voice. Alaska had become more than a project to her. It was the next chapter, and she had waited for Lucas to decide if it was his too. He had. The decision had not come with a moment of thunder or tears. It had arrived one still morning. When he realized the cabin no longer felt like shelter, it felt like a starting point. And starting points were meant to be left behind. Their truck was parked beside the woodshed, engine already humming. The back was packed with gear, Emma's research equipment, a tent, sleeping bags, crates of supplies. The inside was clean, warm, ready. Lucas finished his coffee, set the mug on the railing, and whistled once. Maggie rose, stretched slowly, and padded toward the door. She paused for a moment at the threshold, nose twitching, as if memorizing the scent of home. Then, tail swaying. She stepped outside and trotted to the truck. Emma appeared with her backpack slung over one shoulder. I thought she'd hesitate. Lucas shook his head. She's been ready longer than I have. Emma smiled. He glanced once more at the cabin. The window panes reflected the morning sky. Inside, the chairs were stacked, the firewood neatly arranged, the floor swept clean. He had left a journal on the table, pages filled with the winter's stories, notes, and drawings. If anyone ever came looking, they'd find the whole truth there. I'm ready, he said simply. They climbed into the truck. Maggie jumped into the back seat without being told, circling once before settling down with her head between her paws. The truck pulled away, its tires crunching over wet gravel and patches of ice. They drove in silence for a time, the forest giving way to wide hills and thawing streams. As they crested a rise, Lucas looked in the side mirror. The cabin was gone from view. Ahead, the sky opened. The road stretched east, where the first full sun of spring poured light across the horizon. The air felt different now, not like escape, but like momentum. Emma glanced over. You nervous? Lucas grinned, terrified. She laughed. That's how you know it's real. The truck rolled on. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come in thunder or flame, but in silence, in stillness. and in the warmth shared between unlikely hearts. This story began with a wounded bear and a grieving man, both lost in their own way, but through compassion, trust, and the quiet courage to say yes to life again, something sacred unfolded. Perhaps it was no accident. Perhaps, in the coldest winter of Lucas's life, God sent not just a bear to his door, but a reminder that healing often comes in the most unexpected forms. From the paws of a cub, the gaze of a loyal dog, or the kindness of a stranger. We are reminded that we are never truly alone. These are not just coincidences, they are small echoes of grace, gifts from a loving Creator who sees us. Even when we cannot see ourselves in our everyday lives, we all carry wounds, we all have winters, but as this story shows, hope can return, sometimes when we open our door, and sometimes when we simply open our heart. If this story touched your soul, I invite you to share this video with someone who might need a little light today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, your own stories of healing and hope. Subscribe for more stories that inspire, remind, and restore. And above all, may God bless you and your loved ones with peace, protection, and purpose. If you believe in quiet miracles and second chances, type Amen in the comments and let faith echo through every heart that reads it.